In-depth football coverage from The Athletic is now just £1 per week. See the link in the description to sign up today. The revenue from legal global sports betting is estimated at around $1.7 trillion a year. And of that, football makes up roughly $900 billion. Meaning that the match-fixing industry, which seeks to influence results and outcomes, is potentially worth billions in itself. But what is match-fixing? Where does it happen? Who is involved? And why is it so difficult to detect? Well, it can be broken down into two different categories. Match-fixing is much as it sounds. It's the illicit and intentional attempt to influence the outcome of a sports event. Spot fixing, though, is more specific, and it involves the manipulation of events within a fixture around which a betting market exists. So here are two examples. When 8 members of the Chicago White Sox were banned for life for fixing the result of baseball's 1919 World Series, that was an example of match fixing. However, when the Pakistani cricketer Mohammad Asif was found to have deliberately bowled no bowls in a 2010 Test match against England, he was guilty of spot fixing and being part of a conspiracy to defraud bookmakers. But it needn't always involve players, though. Officials can be bought and compelled to make decisions which favour particular markets, while coaches too can be persuaded to field weakened teams, omit influential players, or make tactical decisions which serve ulterior motives. Sometimes a fix needn't involve anyone actually involved in the event. In the late 1990s, for instance, the Premier League was blighted by a succession of floodlight failures. Most memorably, in November 1997, West Ham fought back from 2-0 down against Crystal Palace to equalise with a 65th minute Frank Lampard goal. At which point, the stadium went dark and the game was abandoned, with the scoreline frozen at 2-2. Bad news for the fans, but good news for an Asian betting syndicate, who, because enough of the game had been played for particular markets to be settled, were able to cash their winnings. Floodlights would also go out a month later during a game between Arsenal and Wimbledon, and then again at the Valley during a game between Charlton and Liverpool. Following a tip-off, 2 Malaysians, 1 Chinese man and the Charlton security supervisor were all sentenced to custodial sentences after it was revealed that they had conspired to trip the ground's electrics using a remote-controlled device. Sometimes match-fixing has a sporting objective. More commonly, as in that instance, outcomes are manipulated for the purposes of gambling. And that's the kind of match-fixing that we'll be concentrating on. And specifically in football, which, because of its appeal, its number of competitions, and also the range of betting opportunities it affords, is considered to be the sport most at risk. In 2015, the Qatar-based International Centre for Sport Security estimated that up to €1 billion is staked on each Premier League game, and that 80% of the money wagered on those matches is from within countries where sporting betting is either illegal or improperly regulated. So this is a big, big business. The games never stop, and the flows of money around them are absolutely enormous. And together, that helps to partly explain the relative ease with which criminal activity is able to hide in plain sight. But who is actually doing this? Well, sometimes it's an individual acting for their own benefit. A professional sportsperson can take advantage of certain markets and then use friends to place bets, for example. Generally, though, the kind of match fixing that gets exposed is enacted by players or teams, but orchestrated by organised crime groups or networks. And actually, the most complex forms of match fixing usually rely on the two groups working together. One organised crime group, or OCG, is local and responsible for making contact with officials or players and arranging payments. In many cases, individuals might be targeted because of debts or addictions, or because they are vulnerable in some other way. The local OCG can obviously profit from this activity themselves, but they're often acting on behalf of the second group, a larger OCG that pays them for their service and local knowledge. These OCGs are frequently based in China and specifically take advantage of Asian betting markets and Asian handicap betting. Some 65% of the world's betting takes place on such markets, and they are subject to less regulation than the European equivalent. Some of these books are run illegally and therefore not subject to the same checks as European markets. Now, these larger OCGs are often involved in other criminal activities such as money laundering, drugs, weapons or people trafficking, and other types of fraud or property crimes. This of course means that match fixing directly subsidises the most serious types of crime right up to murder. Or as Europol put it, overall, match fixing, fueled by illegal betting, is perceived by criminals as a high-profit and relatively low-risk crime. So underneath this larger network, what are the mechanics of fixing a game? Well, certain types of spot fixing only need one player to be involved, whereas fixing a whole result or a number of goals or cards requires the cooperation of several, and potentially also officials and coaching staff. Intermediaries are used to make contact, facilitate payments and ensure outcomes, but OCGs are becoming increasingly sophisticated. One common tactic is for fixers to embed themselves in a club, almost like a parasite. This is done either by buying the club outright, which can itself be a useful vehicle for laundering, or by creating a promised financial relationship with the club. As an example, let's say that an OCG from China wants to fix games in an African top-flight league. First, they form a front company and use an intermediary with a background in football to make the approach to the club. Then, the company offers to sponsor the rest of the season, but only if they can get the club to employ a particular manager and bring in certain players. In reality though, the manager and players are part of the fixing gang. Once a certain number of games have been fixed, the front company either disappears or cuts ties, blaming poor results or a lack of involvement. This trick can be repeated as many times as the OCG can set up fronts. According to Europol, Russian-speaking OCGs are also increasingly using this approach, taking over certain clubs with a view to fixing games and laundering cash. And of course, they can also target match officials. In the German match-fixing scandal of 2005, referee Robert Häuser confessed to fixing a number of games in the second and third tier of German football, as well as in the German Cup. Among others, Häuser was proven to have taken a bribe to fix Hamburg's DFB Pokal match against Paderborn in 2004. In 2005, he would be banned for life by the DFB and served a prison sentence of 2.5 years. But he also cooperated with prosecutors, leading to the arrest of a second referee, Dominic Marks, who would receive a suspended sentence. And it would also be revealed that the match-fixing scandal had been masterminded by a Croatian syndicate comprising of 3 men who had operated out of a cafe in Berlin. According to Häuser's indictment, one of these brothers had made in excess of 750,000 euros from that infamous Paderborn victory. And during the referee's trial, it was also discovered that the syndicate would ring him in his dressing room at half-time during games, and that in total, he was responsible for 9 fixed games for which Häuser was found to have accepted 67,000 euros and a new flat-screen television. Ultimately, his fraud was discovered because his decisions were so obviously strange. But while referees can have a clear impact on games, players have to fix matches in more subtle ways, and those can be very difficult to spot. So, if match fixing is relatively easy to arrange and hard to detect, how can it be stopped? Well, there are 3 main ways: intelligence, betting analysis, and game analysis, and most of the time, the 3 work in tandem. Intelligence can take on many forms: informants, tracking individuals previously shown or suspected to have been involved in fixing, and players or officials raising concerns. Betting analysis is conducted in-house by bookmakers or by third-party companies like Sportsradar. It looks at odds and market movements to detect suspicious patterns. If a game is halfway through and the score is 0-0, the likelihood of an over 3 goals outcome should be drastically reduced and the odds longer. But if the game is fixed, then it's likely that money is continuing to back that outcome, which keeps the odds shorter than they should be. Game analysis uses sophisticated analytics tools to observe how a team played. This will be looked at relatively, comparing a team in one fixture against an average of others, or examining a team's performance during the course of a game to see whether there were, for instance, significant changes to marking patterns or the depth of defensive lines. Both these types of analysis can show if a team has deviated from the way they normally play. And individual player performances can be analysed too, with StatsPerform, who are becoming increasingly involved in integrity, grading individuals' actions on a sliding scale of suspicion. This includes positive acts like goal line clearances that likely show that a player isn't involved in any fixing activity. But game analysis is tricky. In a low-scoring, luck-dominated game like football, anomalies occur. As a result, this kind of scrutiny is generally applied to matches over which concerns have already been raised. And the overall framework for investigating and prosecuting match fixing is complex too, and comparatively underfunded. In 2020, Interpol's entire budget, not just for match fixing but for everything, was €135 million. And Europol's, while slightly larger, was still just $175 million. Together, that's just around a third of what's estimated to be staked on one Premier League game. Sports Radar estimates that 1% of all events they look at indicate fixing. While top professional leagues are often insulated because players and even officials receive good pay and significant scrutiny, match fixing is considered endemic in smaller leagues or lower paid sports. And it's even spread to esports. In March 2020, with professional sports shutting down because of the pandemic, fixers turned their attention online. An Australian professional e-gamer reported being offered £30,000 to lose a FIFA 20 match. In other cases, gamers have reported threatening or coercing behaviour prior to their fixtures, and abusive comments from disgruntled punters on social media afterwards. But the real-life Premier League is relatively protected. It has several things in its favour. Its officials are professional and highly audited. The players are also extremely well paid, meaning that incentives for involvement in fixing would have to be unrealistically high. But further down the pyramid, it's a different story. In 2013, it was reported in The Guardian that Asian gangs were thought to be targeting lower league matches in England, with millions of pounds wagered on a single non-league tie. The same year, many UK bookmakers had stopped taking bets on games involving AFC Hornchurch, Billericay Town and Chelmsford City, all clubs outside the professional leagues, represented in many cases by players without much financial security. And the ex-footballer Moses Swabu knows what it's like to be in that position. Raised in South London, he grew up dodging the no-ball game signs in Croydon, playing local football for his district and watching Crystal Palace from the Holmesdale stand at Selhurst Park. A tall, slender centre-half, he progressed through the fertile Palace Academy. He captained youth and reserve teams along the way before, like so many other young hopefuls, being released in his late teens. Instead of the top flight, his senior professional career began down the leagues at Lincoln City. He won the Young Player of the Year award at the end of his first season and was linked with moves to Aston Villa and Birmingham. But that was also when he first encountered match fixing. He was 19, and late one night before an away game, teammate Delroy Facey, a former Premier League player, invited him to his hotel room, where he would find a man he had never met before and €60,000 in cash. He was young and impressionable, and he trusted the older player. More importantly, for fear of the consequences and likely effect on his career, he didn't feel able to tell anyone about what had happened. He would say no to the offer, but that first exposure would prove a life-changing moment. Swabu left Lincoln in 2011, falling into non-league football, and in doing so, he became more exposed to those who prey on the game at that level. He would be tried twice for match fixing. On the second occasion, in 2015, he was found guilty of conspiracy to commit bribery and was sentenced to 16 months in prison. He was also given a 15-year suspended ban from football. But prison changed his outlook. It was there that he conceived the idea for what today is MS5 Solutions, which combines consultancy with education and which works with organisations to empower the current and future generation of sports leaders. MS5 have held workshops with young players at Premier League clubs during each of the past 4 seasons, with groups at Crystal Palace, West Ham, Manchester United and Chelsea among them. In addition to which, the consultancy has worked with data organisation Genius Sports, helping them to use their data to better identify corrupted matches, and has held seminars at Loughborough University. The aim is cultural reform, but it's also to help produce a new generation of athletes and leaders in sport equipped with the education and ethics that protect a career, to which match fixing is as serious a threat as there is. Its promises of low risks and high rewards stalk the game at every level, all across the world. With the benefit of technological changes in betting and the globalization of crime, match fixing is the very definition of a 21st century crime. If you liked today's video, please subscribe to the channel to help us reach 1 million subscribers. And we're also pleased to be able to offer you access to The Athletic for just £1 per week. Follow the stories that you care about with closer access and intelligent takes. See the link in the description now to sign up. Thank you.